Welcome to the Absolute Beginner's Garden 101, Part 3, Starting from Seed, presented by the Jefferson Public Library's Seed Library. So we're going to talk about in Part 3, how do you start from seeds? Everything you need to have to get your setup going so you can create beautiful seedlings for later transplants. We're going to talk about potting up. What is that? Do you even need to do it? And then what doesn't transplant? Things you need to stay away from when transplanting. And then can you use old seeds? So the equipment you need when you want to start from seed. And I should mention here that everything that I'm going to be going over in the how to start from seed is a very general overview. For greater detail and more specifics, please log on to jefferson.prlib.org, click on Seed Library, scroll down to Growing Tips, and then look for Starting Seed Indoors. This will give you all of this information plus all the details that you need to get your setup up and running so you can have beautiful seedlings for later transplants. The equipment that you need some kind of pot, whether that's peat moss pots, plastic cells, or even homemade pots. You need trays to put those pots in. We'll talk about why trays are important later on when we get to watering. Then we're going to talk about seed starting mix and coco coir and why you need those versus potting mix. Then, of course, you need water and you need your seeds, and then labels and pens. Very important that you label your seedlings. So if you want to make your own biodegradable seedling pots, all you need is a little planning to get you going. You can use toilet paper rolls or yogurt cups or yogurt type of cups. So all you have to do is just plan ahead, save those. And if you're going to use yogurt cups or any type of cup like that, please wash it with soap and water and let it dry. It is so important, and we'll talk about why in just a moment. You're going to want to make sure that those cups have holes in the bottom. You can use a clean nail or a clean drill bit and punch holes in the bottom so that that water can drain out, so you don't introduce or allow mold or fungus to grow in your seedling cells. If you're going to use toilet paper rolls, just cut 4 1-inch cuts in a square pattern and then fold them just like the picture, and you have a pot ready to go, and it'll degrade in the garden. So seed starting mix versus potting soil. Seed starting mix or coco coir is sterile, whereas potting soil is not. Seedlings are very susceptible to fungus and mold, and they can do what's called dampening off. Dampening off will either kill that seedling or weaken that seedling. And the last thing you want is a weak seedling because it may not produce good fruit. So when you are choosing a pot size, it's going to vary on what you're looking for. How much space you have is going to determine the amount of cells or the size of your cells. It's also how much you're going to grow. The kind of plant even is going to determine how big those cells need to be. And then how much repotting up you want to do. And we'll talk about what repotting up means in just a moment. And then whatever you have, whatever cells or pots, just make sure that there's holes in the bottom for that water to drain out and leak in. So when you're starting from seeds, there are lighting requirements that you're going to have. There are 3 basic kinds. There's fluorescent, there's high density intensity, there's light emitting diode. And for more information about each one of these, please log on to the website listed below, follow these instructions, and go to Starting Seeds Indoors. It will have a lot more details so that you can make the best choice for what you want to do. So before you purchase, there's some things you need to keep in mind and some things you need to know. First, decide how much space you're going to devote to your seedlings. I basically take over the dining room area. I don't have a lot of space, so I can't grow a lot. But decide how much space you want to devote, and that's going to determine a lot of how much lighting you need to purchase. Decide on what sort of plants you wish to grow. Not every plant is conducive to starting for a later transplant, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. And then think about how the lights are going to be positioned over your plants. That's very important. And then think about the distance from the plants for the light. Lights are going to be much closer to that plant than what you think they're going to be, and depending on what kind of light you chose is going to determine how close or how far those lights are going to be from your plants. And a lot of that is also trial and error. Lights do need to be close to those seedlings to prevent legginess. What legginess is when those seedlings are reaching for that light, and so they get this really thin, long stalk, and then they flop over. And so they're not strong enough to support the plant. And what you're really looking for in seedlings that you're starting, you want them to be short, you want them to be stocky, so that they have a nice thick stalk so that they can support the future growth. Then you also need to consider the number of hours of light that the plant is going to need, and that's going to vary on the type of plant it is. And then also the darkness that the plant needs. Plants do need a minimum hours of darkness in order to thrive. And for more information, more details on all of this, please again log on to our website. The instructions are below. Look for that starting seed from indoors. So preparation. You have your lights, you have your stands, you have everything you need, and now you're ready to start planting. So you're going to want to pre-moisten your starting mix. This is important. That starting mix is bone dry. If you just fill up your pots with that dry stuff and then plant your seeds and then you pour your water on it, that seed starting mix is going to float. Your seeds are probably going to sink to the bottom, and they're never going to germinate because they're too far from the light. And it's going to take days for that seed starting mix to absorb the water. So please pre-moisten your mix. It's going to save you so much trouble in the long run. And for more details on how moist to get it, again, log on to the website. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill your pots yourself, and then you're going to punch them down with your thumb or your finger, and then you're going to refill it again and then level that off. And what this does is that creates a good, strong base for those roots to develop. This is another reason why you want to pre-moisten your mix, because if you don't pre-moisten your mix, you're going to have all these air spaces, and those roots aren't going to properly develop. Good roots, healthy root system equals healthy plant. So you want a good, firm base for those roots to develop so that you can have healthy roots and a healthy plant. So when you're ready to start sowing the seed, you have your pots already filled up, it's pre-moistened, got a good base. There's two basic types of methods that you can do. There's the overseeding method, and then there's the single seeding method. The overseeding method does not work for a lot of things, but it's really good for herbs and for like your loose leaf lettuces. For herbs, and for loose leaf lettuces, basically you're overseeding the cell, and it's for division later. So for herbs, if you overseed that cell and then they all grow up and it's ready to be repotted, which we'll talk more about in just a second. Basically, you can divide that cell, repot the plants, and then you've got two little seedlings, two herbs that you can either repot or divide again and plant outside. Or if you're doing like loose leaf lettuces, these are lettuces that are not going to grow into maturity if you're doing the overseed method. These are cut and come again lettuces, so you're harvesting continually, letting it regrow, and so you're having like a nice little fresh salad every day. It's not something that you are planning on taking outside and letting it do its, full maturity thing. Single seed method is really more for plants like your peppers or tomatoes, things that you really only want one plant per cell. So you're sowing 2 to 3 seeds per cell, because not all seeds germinate, and then you're going to thin to that strongest seedling. Again, you're going to need to know your light requirements for your seedlings. Some require 12, 14 hours of light. It just sort of depends on the plant. And then please label your plants. As you can see in my picture here, I'm doing some spring onions and some radish. This was an experiment I did with growing radish inside instead of growing it outdoors. And you want to label it because when radish sprouts, it all looks the same. You can't tell which variety it is until you harvest. The same is true with your peppers and your tomatoes. They all look the same until they produce their fruit. So you need to label your plants so you know what variety they are. So watering and fertilizing. This is why you need a tray for your seed pots. You want to bottom water your plants. This is so important for your seedlings. If you top water, your seeds could mix around and go into different cells, and then your whole labeling system is all messed up. You could also introduce more harmful things to your seedlings by top watering. So if you bottom water, that water is going to wick up through those holes in the pots, and you're going to fill your tray about half, third full, and then you're going to let it sit for like a half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that. And then anything that's not absorbed into your cells, you're going to want to dump out, because if you let that water sit, it's going to develop mold, possibly some fungal bacteria stuff, and your seedlings could dampen off. So make sure that they're not over wet. So when do you water? Well, this is where your seed starting mix and your coco coir really help you out. When those are moist, when they're saturated, they're really dark. When they're dry, they turn more of a lighter color. So when you start seeing your soil getting, or your starting mix getting light in color, then it's time to water. And again, for more information, more details on how much watering and all of that, please log on to the website, follow the instructions here, and then click on starting seeds indoors. So when do you fertilize these seedlings? In the seed itself, there's enough energy for that seedling to sprout and to grow for a few days before it needs more food. And so the kind of fertilizer that you need to give your seedlings is water soluble. You want to stay away from fertilizers that are meant to break down over a period of time, because you want something that's right available for those roots to take up into the plant. Make sure it's water soluble. Also, what you'll need to be aware of, if it's fertilizer that's meant for mature plants that are like out in the garden outside thriving, you're going to want to dilute that fertilizer down. And for the specific ratio of that, please, again, log on to the website. That information is there. You're going to fertilize every 7 to 10 days. And again, just watch your plants. It will tell you if it's getting too much fertilizer. It will also tell you if they're not getting enough fertilizer. And that kind of information, again, is on the website. So what doesn't transplant? Beans, do not transplant. Beans, lemon beans, bush beans, pole beans, any kind of beans. They hate having their roots disturbed. So if you transplant them, you're going to disturb their roots, and you're either going to kill that plant or you're going to harm it in some way, and it's not going to be as happy. Any root vegetable, all root vegetables will not transplant because you're disturbing those roots, and it's just not good. Don't do it. Lettuce is tricky. Lettuce, it grows from a crown. So if you have your soil line and you get that crown too far above or too far below, you're going to kill that plant. So lettuce is really tricky. It's so much easier to direct sow that, direct sow your lettuce. Corn is another one. Direct sow that one. It does not transplant well. So just avoid that. You'll save yourself some heartache. Melons, cucumbers, and squash, you can transplant, but why? It really doesn't make a lot of sense, because you can direct sow. You're doing that after the average frost date in your area, and there's plenty of time in the growing season. You don't need to get a jump start by transplanting it. You can, there's nothing wrong with it. Why? Potting up. Potting up is where you need to basically transplant your seedling into a bigger pot because it's outgrown the pot that it was in. So this is something you have to keep in mind when you're setting up your seed starting area, because the bigger the pot, the more space it needs. So that's something you have to keep in mind when you're planning out. You don't want to start with all these little cells and then have to pot up all that and then not have enough lights to keep these plants alive. So one thing you can do, this is what I do. I hate potting up. I don't like doing it. So for my plants that I know that are going to take a long time to grow and that I have to start early, like my peppers and my tomatoes, I start them in a large pot. So by the time I plant them, to the time that they're going to be transplanted out in the garden, at that time, that's when they outgrow their pots. So peppers, I typically start end of February, start 1st of March, somewhere in there. And I start them in a pretty good sized pot. And I transplant them end of April, beginning of May. And it's at that time that they're ready to be repotted. So when I transplant them out the garden, they have all the space they need. So, but if you want to repot, if you love repotting, or if you just want to do it, what you need to know, what you need to look for is you want to repot plants only after they have at least one set of true leaves. You're like, what is that? That sounds too complicated. It's really very simple. True leaves look like the mature leaves of whatever plant it is. So spinach leaves look, true leaves look like spinach leaves. True leaves on peppers look like pepper leaves. True leaves on tomatoes look like tomatoes. You get the idea. So if they have at least true leaves, one set of true leaves, then you can transplant them or repot them up. The other thing you can look for in repotting is if the plant is as tall as the pot is deep, then it's time to repot the plant. Its roots don't have any more space. And again, remember, healthy roots, healthy plant. And if you cram all those roots in, they're going to weaken and you're just going to weaken your plant. So you want to repot that plant and get it into a larger pot so that its roots can continue to develop and that plant can continue to thrive. The other option is if it gets to that stage and it's time to plant it outside, again, make sure you have your planting chart. We went over that extensively in part 2 of the Absolute Beginner Garden. If it's time to plant your plants outside and they're ready to be potted up, you don't have to repot them. Just plant them outside. Just make sure it's the proper time for that plant. So can you plant old seeds? Short answer, yes. But there's some things you need to be aware of. So the viability of seeds. The viability is that energy that is stored in the seed that allows it to survive the storage process and then still have enough energy for that seed to sprout and germinate and grow. So most seeds will have enough viability, enough energy to survive for 2 years in storage and then be able to sprout. Some seeds, cilantro is a great, or coriander as the seed is called, they can survive for many, many years and still have enough energy to sprout. Some seeds are like that. Others are on the opposite end of the spectrum. Things like parsley and onion, their seeds only have enough energy for 1, maybe 2 years and still have enough energy to sprout. So you can plant old seeds. Just be aware that the germination rate may be lower. So you may want to plant more seed so that you can get more plants to germinate. I typically plant all my seed until it doesn't sprout anymore, because I just hate throwing seed away. But just be aware that you're going to have lower germination rates, so you just have to plant more to get the number of plants that you want. So wrapping all this up, to start from seed, we went over the equipment that you need and the basics of how to do it, and we just did an overview of that information. For greater details on exactly how to do that, more details on the lighting and the fertilizing and just all the little nuances that you might need to know, please log on to jefferson.prlib.org, click on Seed Library, scroll down to Growing Tips, and then click on the Starting Seeds Indoors. We talked about potting up, and how do you do that? And it just depends on if you even want to mess with potting up, or if you're like me and I'm like, I don't want to mess with potting up. I'm just going to start it in a larger pot and be done with it. We talked about things that don't transplant, like just don't do it, and things that you can transplant, but it's better to start from seed. And then, of course, you can use old seed and just use more of it so you can get more germination. Lastly, be willing to learn from your mistakes. Every year is a different gardening year. I have a garden fail every year. If you want to read about my garden fails and some of the stupid things I've done and some of the just things that happen because nature is there and does things, please log on to that same website, jefferson.prlib.org, click on Seed Library, and then check out my blog. It's called Grow Something. And if you need a good laugh, check out my garden fails. Every year is a different garden adventure. There's always good things that happen every year, and then there's challenges that happen every year. And every year is just a learning and growing experience. No pun intended. I hope that this is helpful to you and that it'll just help make your garden all the better. I do want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Howlington's Feed and Supply and Burpee, as well as community members like you who carefully save seeds and donate them to the Seed Library. We would not be able to be up and running without our donors. So thank you very much. Please stay tuned for more Absolute Beginner's Garden 101 as we talk about things like the spacing of your plants, crop rotation, worms and composting, all these different things just to help your garden thrive and be a success. Have a great day.